Thank you, thank you. It is very wonderful to be here with you and to be here on the 21st anniversary of the bookstore, and also my marvelous friend Deborah Rose, to hear you sing with us. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to all of you for giving me this opportunity. I know that you have about 1,357 candidates that you need to listen to. And so thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you my thoughts and my ideas and my vision for where America is, where America has been, and where America should be going. When I heard Deborah sing, that beautiful music felt like a tuning fork of the soul. You could just feel it in the room that we were all in a place of one heartbeat. And that is so different than what you normally think of as politics in America today. Here we were in one place in our hearts as opposed to a gazillion shattered pieces of glass of personality, which is what politics has become. And I'm reminded of a line from Mahatma Gandhi when he said that politics should be sacred. Now, he wasn't saying it should be religious. He wasn't saying it should be about doctrine or dogma. But he was saying, I believe, what we felt here tonight when Deborah was singing, that when we discuss political things, we should be discussing political things from a deep, sober, heartfelt place within us, not from the shouting and the opposition and the craziness and the chaos and the power and the money and all of those things which have come so much to dominate our public sphere and our politics. And it's not just, oh, isn't it too bad? The fact that it is what it is literally dangerous. It is dangerous to our democracy, and it could be dangerous to our species if we're not careful. So I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity. And that's what these primaries give us. There's something very profound going on here. I've noticed that there seem to be two, it's not just that there seems to be, there are, in fact, what amounts to two different political universes. And one political universe is the polls and the pundits and the money and the establishment and the power and the media. That's that. That's one universe. And then there's another universe, and it's right here with us. It's where American citizens get together, the people who live here, the people who know that our responsibility, and I know that the people in New Hampshire know this. You can feel it in the people in New Hampshire, you can feel it in the people in Iowa, you can feel it in South Carolina, you can feel it in Nevada. You're the deciders. And I don't get that you don't get that. I get that you do get that. I get that people here in these primary states know it really doesn't matter what MSNBC or CNN or Fox or the DNC say. What really matters is what you say. And that's a good thing. That's what democracy should be. So I feel very privileged to be part of this process. This is truly an honor. And I'm very aware, particularly as a woman, that there are places in this world where if I said, first of all, there are places in this world we wouldn't even have the right to congregate, to assemble the way we are tonight, to talk about whatever we want. There are places in the world where I as a woman would not be able to speak. And there are places in the world where if I, particularly as a woman, were to say a fraction of what I say in criticism of my government, I would most probably be hauled off to jail, possibly tortured, and possibly even worse. So I just want to start with a place of gratitude. And gratitude to you, Deborah, for bringing us into this place. Gratitude to you, Catherine. I think particularly at a time when we have to do with our country. You know, sometimes it's like when you go to therapy or you're talking to a good friend and you're having to look at some painful truths about yourself. It's really important that there's somebody there to remind you, you didn't do everything wrong. Just as much as it's important sometimes when you're too high on yourself to make sure there's somebody there to say, you know, you didn't do everything right. I remember once I was talking to a friend about a mistake I had made when I was 40 years old. And I said something to her like, well, I was young. And there was silence. And then she said, you weren't that young. So I feel that way about America right now. We have to have some real truth-telling. We need to get real, ladies and gentlemen, but all within a context of how much we love our country, how much we love each other, how much we love the world, how much we love the planet, and to always remember that which remains, and to be grateful for that which remains, and to remember that our democracy and our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution don't just give us rights. They also give us responsibilities. And our responsibility is to take those rights and to make sure that they're protected and blessed during our time on this earth. That we take the principles of our democracy and shore them up in our time and make sure that they're expanded to the best of our ability so that they're not just talk in anybody's life, and to be willing to push back against any assault upon them from any forces, and also to then, to the best of our ability, bequeath them to our children as good as the way we found them. That's our job, that's our task. I'm reminded of John Adams, our second president, who said that he hoped that every July 4th we would revisit our first principles. Now, our first principles are established in our Declaration of Independence, and it amounts to our mission statement. And it's important to revisit your mission statement because it reminds you, why are we doing this? What are the principles on which we stand? And principles are internal powers. They guide your decision making, they guide your attitudes, they guide the way things unfold. And I think in our generation we have forgotten to bond deeply, emotionally and psychologically with the principles on which we purport to stand. They're printed on marble walls, they're inscribed in walls, and they're written on parchment. But that's not enough. If the principles of the Declaration of Independence are not alive in our hearts, then for all intents and purposes, they're dead. That's how principles are. They're not alive in you, it's just talk. If they're not alive in you, they're for all intents and purposes dead. And that's very, very dangerous in a democracy for the people ourselves to fail to be deeply bonded with the principles on which we purport to stand. You know what it makes us? It makes us easy to play. And we've been played. And we need to wake up, and we need to see it, and we need to reclaim this stuff, and I believe we need to do it now. I don't see Donald Trump as anything other than an opportunistic infection. He could not have gotten hold of us had there not been a weakened societal immune system. And each and every one of us is an immune cell. That's what the citizen is. We're immune cells in the body politic of our country. It doesn't matter what form the infection comes in. Just getting rid of the infection is not going to be enough. We have to boost the immune system so that that infection doesn't just morph into another symptom. Because if all we do is get rid of that infection, as in replacing that president in 2022, but in 2020, but then the illness, the underlying illness still remains, it'll be back in the midterms. Those forces will still be back in the midterms in 22. Those forces will really be back big time in 24. And so I think we need to boost something within ourselves, our own awareness, our own awakeness, so that this country can be reclaimed on the level it needs to be reclaimed on, which is within ourselves. So I'd like to very quickly go over 4 principles from the Declaration of Independence, all of which we know. But the fact that we know these things doesn't mean they're alive and ablaze in our hearts or in our minds the way they need to be. And power is not in your hands if it's not in your head. Power is not in your hands if it's not in your heart. So let's just go over these things. Number 1, God created, or no, the first one is not that God. It says, though, all men are created equal. The second is that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. Now, these got awfully deep here. Number 3 is that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And number 4, if the government's not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or abolish it. We have lost our rambunctiousness, haven't we? We've lost our revolutionary fervor. And it turns out that the American Revolution is an ongoing process. We naively, foolishly, in a state of mass distractedness, acted like it was just a done deal. We were very grateful to those who established us as a democracy. Thank you so much. And we figured somebody was going to be tending to it. But is that really the way it works in life? If you don't tend to your body, can you be that shocked if you get sick? If you don't tend to your health, if you don't tend to your relationship, can you really be that shocked if the other person says, I've had enough? If you don't tend to your business, can you really be that shocked when it goes under? We did not tend to our democracy, thinking it was somebody else's business. And you know what that created? It created a class of somebody else's. That's what it did. So I don't think it's so much that our democracy has been taken as that we have in too many ways abdicated it. And I think it's important because in any situation in life, we have to recognize our own part that we played in our own disaster. So that's the first thing, is a change within ourselves. to ask ourselves in our time and in our generation, do we or do we not mean those things? You see, the generation, and when I'm in New Hampshire, I'm always in awe of this. New Hampshireites should all remember that the abolitionist movement, a lot of it came from here. It was the early evangelicals and Quakers in New Hampshire. Out of that arose the abolitionist movement. It wasn't the government who said we're going to get rid of slavery now. It was the abolitionists here. It was people who rose up. And why did they rise up? They rose up because this whole all men are created equal thing, God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness thing, they meant it. And when the women suffragettes, you know, the U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote, shall we? No. With the women's suffragette movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. Why? Because you know that all men are created equal thing, therefore that should mean women too, and God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, so that should be women too. They meant it. And when segregation and institutionalized white supremacy prevailed within the American South, and Dr. King and a generation of civil rights workers rose up. Why did they rise up? Because it wasn't because the government rose up. The government didn't wake up one day and say, let's desegregate the American South. A group of Americans rose up. They rose up and they stepped in. Why? Because you know those principles about all people are created equal? And all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They meant it. It's time for you and me to decide. Do we mean it? Because you know that aristocracy that this country was founded to repudiate? This country was founded in repudiation of a system in which only a few people got to win. This country was founded in repudiation of a system in which a few people, you know, there was the king and the queen and then their rich friends. And the rich friends got the money. The rich friends got the land. The rich friends got the opportunity. The rich friends got the education. And then the vast majority of people were little more than serfs. We didn't tend to that. We just assumed, okay, we repudiated it. It's over. Silly us. Silly, naive, foolish us. Because we have regressed. We have, for all intents and purposes, regressed. You know all that of the people, by the people, for the people thing? Are we not of a few of the people, by a few of the people, and for a few of the people? Are we not of huge multinational corporate interests, by huge multinational corporate interests, and for huge multinational corporate interests? Have we not regressed to an aristocratic paradigm? We can call it now a corporatocracy. It's the same thing. It used to be old lords and ladies of England. Now it's health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, food companies, oil and gas companies, gun manufacturers, and defense contractors. They're the new aristocracy. First, they get their profits. And boy, have they. We have had such a massive transfer of wealth in the last 40 years that 1% of all Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. We didn't have wealth inequality in the 1970s. This all started with the trickle-down economic theory. Oh, all that we had to do was let corporations live with financial fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders. It was going to be great. Even if it was at the expense of workers and at the expense of the community and at the expense of the environment, but it was going to be great, see, because yeah, they were going to make so much money, but they would be job creators. And so all that money would trickle down and it would lift all boats. The country bought it, but after 40 years, don't you think the jury's in? Mm-hmm. It has not lifted all boats. It has left millions of people without even a life vest. It has created the largest income inequality since 1929. It has left 40% of all Americans living with chronic economic anxiety. Millions and millions of Americans in the richest country in the world who live with daily concern, what will happen if I get sick? What will happen if one of my kids gets sick? How will I pay for my kids to go to college? How will I get out from under these college loans? In the richest country in the world. And let's go further. In northern New Hampshire, 25% of the children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night. 13 million American children are food insecure. We have millions of American children who go to school every day hungry, asking the teacher if maybe the teacher has some food for them. Millions of American children who go to school every day in classrooms where they don't have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by 8 years old, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Millions of American children live in what's called America's domestic war zones, where the violence in their homes, their communities, and their schools is so great that psychologists say they are suffering from a form of PTSD no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan and Iraq. But our political establishment, you see, is so corrupted by the influence of those huge corporate dollars that it does more to advocate for the profitability of those corporations than to advocate for those children. And so those children's despair is simply normalized. They're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency, and they're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. We should be rescuing these children, no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. That's why I want a Department of Children and Youth. We need wraparound services, community wraparound services. We need trauma-informed education. We need mental health services, not only for the children, but for the parents as well. We need emotional and psychological learning skills. We need mindfulness in the schools. We need so much. We not only need to help these children, we need to help the elderly who are similarly just let go by a system that basically has no use for them because they don't serve this virulent strain of capitalism that has so corrupted our government in the last 40 years. And that, for anyone who needs to know, is not for me an anti-capitalist statement. It's a virulent strain of capitalism. I believe in capitalism with a conscience. But it's not just that, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just that we say we don't have the money for our children. We say we don't have the money for all kinds of things, whether it has to do with universal health care, whether it has to do with removing those college loans, whether it has to do with providing a higher education for every American. All the things we say we don't have money for, are we that foolish? Are we really? Isn't there something here about fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, fool me 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? Isn't there a shame on us that's going on here? We are the richest country in the world, but over the last 40 years, we have had a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a very, very few people, culminating this last time in this it's a heist. We call it robbery where I come from. In 2017, a $2 trillion tax cut to the very richest individuals and corporations. They get 83 cents of every dollar goes to them. We need to repeal the tax cut. We need to put back in the middle class tax part. We need to stop these corporate subsidies whereby the $26 billion went to oil and gas alone last year. We need to stop the way the United States government has abdicated, surrendered its capacity to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies for lower drug prices. And look at our national security agenda, which shockingly, only 2 of us on this campaign even talk about. That should tell you everything right there. Because even though I think we'd all agree that our military should have everything that it needs for our national security, I have great respect for the military. This is not a critique of the military. This is a recognition that we should all be very clear about, that the military says they need this much, and then on top of that are hundreds of billions of dollars that are not what the military said they needed, but what defense contractors say they want, because short-term profitability for defense contractors, just like short-term profitability for health insurance companies, just like short-term profitability for big pharmaceutical companies, just like short-term profitability for gun manufacturers and everything else, is placed before your health and well-being, my health and well-being, the health and well-being of our children, the health and well-being of other people in the world, and the health and well-being of the planet on which we live. Now, you and I have problems, and we want to identify our problems, but we need to identify with the problem solvers in our past. Did the abolitionists say, oh, okay, slavery it just is, there's nothing we can do about it? I think they said, hell no. What did the women suffragettes say? Did they just say, okay, suppress women? I don't think so. I think they said, hell no. And did the civil rights movement just say, all right, well, institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, there's nothing we can say about it? Did they just say that? No, no, no. They said, hell no. And what did those brave men in 1776 say? What did those who established the Declaration of Independence and fought the American Revolution? Did they just say to the tyranny of King George, oh, okay? Or did they not say hell no? What has become of us? Is it not our turn to stand up? Is it not our turn to say, you know that all people are created equal thing? We mean that. In our time, we mean that. You know that God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, a child who is stuck in a school that doesn't even have glue sticks and doesn't even have paper and is not getting a fine education. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, in the richest country in the world, for any child not to receive a high-quality education is a passive form of oppression. And it is time for our generation to do what other generations before us have done, to step in and say, that stuff stops right here. One of the things we need to get over is the idea that the government's going to fix itself. This is so silly. Even a better version isn't going to fix it. The status quo perpetuates the status quo. Right. It's like I said, you don't have power in your hands if you don't have power in your heart and you don't have power in your head. So it's like if we want this to change, and we do need to change, we need a fundamental pattern disruption, economically, socially, and politically. It's not going to change because some new elite class of political establishment says, okay, we'll fix it. It doesn't happen that way. It has never in our history happened that way. So of course they say to anybody who's saying something like I'm saying, oh, she's unqualified or she's an outsider. I love that one. Outside what? Outside what? This is America. We're all inside. There is no outside. We said no to the elite issue. We don't do that here theoretically. And so we're living at a time where politics has become we're kind of spectators. But we're just kind of looking like it's a football game, but it's worse. It's not so much like a football game. It's like an alcoholic family system where we're the kids and we both know, I don't think mommy or daddy are telling the whole truth. I don't think mommy or daddy are really telling the whole truth. Or at the very least, I think what's more true to say is that daddy is an abusive father, but mommy's not exactly calling the police. Mommy's just sort of standing in the hall feeling, oh, so terrible about it, and making us feel better after we get our whooping. But she's not challenging daddy. And you know who mommy is, and you know who daddy is. It's time for the kids to say, I'm not leaving the house because the house is mine, but you both need to go to rehab. It's also important to remember that of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, of the 56 signers, and these were very, very brave men. These people risked their lives to sign that declaration. If the British had won the war, they would have been tried and executed as traitors. But it's also definitely part of the American story, and not one to be forgotten, that 41 of them were slave owners. So it's baked into the cake. It's baked into the characterological structure and DNA of the American that we are both. We are both a nation founded on the most aspirational and enlightened principles that have ever formed the core of a nation. And from the beginning, we have been the most violent, at times, perpetrators of transgression against those principles. So this has been true of every generation, and it's true of ours. There is today, tyranny is in the form of an amoral economic system. It's not an immoral economic system. It's not like some people sit in the room, how can we mess with the children? Although that's a different topic because some do actually. But that was not the best image for this. They don't say how can we mess with indigenous tribes or the planet or whatever. It's just that an amoral economic system inevitably creates immoral consequences. And with the explosion of money and its influence, its undue influence on our political system, and obviously particularly since Citizens United, it has so corrupted our government that our government is, for all intents and purposes, a handmaiden to that economic system. So that the government does more to advocate for their short-term profits than it does to advocate for our safety and health and well-being. We must break that pattern. And one of the ways to break that pattern is to have a president who's not of that system. Of course they say you can't do that. That person's not qualified. And you're right, I'm not qualified to drive your car. I say we need a new car. Now I have tremendous respect for good political experts, and we have tremendous political experts, and particularly we have them in the Democratic Party. I'm not running against anybody. I'm running with a lot of really good people. We have the best plans. There's no doubt about it. The Democrats have the best plans. The Democrats have the best policies. And even though everybody's making it like they're all so different, they're not all that different. The issue, however, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, is that this is not a moment where what we most need is political mechanics. What we most need is political vision. You know, FDR said that the primary role of the presidency is moral leadership. He said the administrative aspect of the job is secondary. This is a man who presided over the New Deal. This is a man who got us out of the Depression. This is a man who led us in World War II. He said the primary job is moral leadership. Political expertise is like car mechanics. You need a good car mechanic. But even if you have the best car mechanic in the world, the best car mechanic in the world doesn't necessarily know which road you should take to San Antonio. That's where we're off. We're not on the right road. So the issue is not the mechanics of the car. The issue is, what is the road that we are on? And we are on the road that is determined by an amoral economic system that is the product of a corporatist agenda. And this corporatist agenda is not any more conservative than it is liberal. Because there are high-minded conservative principles and there are high-minded liberal principles. I'm definitely a liberal. I'm a progressive. I'm on the left, I'm on the left end of the Democratic Party spectrum when it comes to economic policies, etc. However, there are high-minded conservative principles. Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. That's true. Nobody has a monopoly on truth. It's important that we listen to each other and honor that in each other. But what's going on today? This is corporatist. This is aristocracy. This is corrosive of our democracy. And it is essentially an undermining of our democracy. You know, we're in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, what I'm about to describe to you, however, is not only a situation which we understand in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, it's a situation that we understand around the country today. And that's a conversation, a phone conversation that I'm about to describe to you, which far too many of us have either made the call or been on the receiving end of the call, or we know far too well what the call is. One person says, "Did you see her at the party last night?" The other person says, "Yeah, I was there." This person says, "You saw that she fell down the stairs, right?" Yeah, the person says, "Yeah, I was looking, I saw." "Did anybody else see?" "Yeah, her brother was there." Silence. "You think we ought to do something?" And the other person says, "Yeah, I've been thinking that too." This person says, "I'm thinking it's time. I don't know who to call. Do you know who to call?" And this person says, "Yeah, well, I know somebody who is an interventionist in California, and I think we should call them." We all know what that call is. We all know now that when it comes to the immoderate use of drugs or alcohol, we've learned the hard way, the painful way, that the survival of the physical body cannot be guaranteed. You don't treat your body right with drugs, alcohol, or anything else, you cannot guarantee its survival. We've got to jump out of our magical thinking because we're acting like the survival of our democracy can just be guaranteed. No, it can't, ladies and gentlemen. And the way we're acting towards our planet, we're also acting like we just assume that the survival of the species can be guaranteed on this planet, and that cannot be guaranteed either. The truth of the matter is we have 12 years. If we do not make a radical turnaround in terms of the climate crisis, which will entail a World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change and provide for a just transition, we could be facing, scientists tell us, and there is a consensus about this, we could be facing a level of social collapse on this planet unseen in the modern era. We could see whole swaths of countries and continents uninhabitable because of the heat. Uninhabitable because of the heat. Where it's uninhabitable because of the heat, they can't grow food. Therefore, you're talking about economic collapse. You're talking about massive food shortages. You're talking about what could be hundreds of millions, God forbid, even more, environmental refugees. Countries going to do drastic measures beyond just building a wall to keep people out. This country needs to awaken and rise to the occasion. We have too many stress points. These are beyond stress points. What is happening to our environment is a stress point. What is happening to our children is a stress point. And our national security agenda? Really? What do we do in our national security agenda except endless preparation for war? How's that going to work? Are we just going to back up into peace one day? Or have we just given up on that whole silly, quaint peace idea? How silly. Do you just take medicine or do you not have to cultivate health? Because sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace isn't the absence of war. Even Donald Rumsfeld said we're going to have to learn to wage peace. Donald Rumsfeld said it. James Mattis, before he left the Department of Defense, said that if you're not going to fully fund the State Department, I'm going to have to buy more ammunition. But we pay $760 billion a year to the military, and we pay $40 billion a year to the State Department. And within the State Department, we pay $17 billion to the USAID for long-term development and humanitarian assistance. We pay out of that $40 billion, less than $1 billion to the peace builders. Peace builders are like to the body politic, to the human civilization, what a health and wellness orientation is to the body. You have to deal with diet, you have to deal with exercise, you have to deal with your lifestyle, you have to cultivate your health. So look at the math here, because a government, a country gets what it pays for, just like individuals do. And how you spend your money shows where your values are, shows where your intentions are. The peace-building agencies are just as sophisticated, represent just as sophisticated expertise as does our military. And in some places around the world, just as much courage is displayed. And it's important that every American know what are the peace-building skills. These four factors, when present, statistically indicate that there will be a higher level of peace and a lower level of conflict. Number one, expanded economic opportunities for women. Duh. Two, expanded educational opportunities for children. Number three, a reduction of violence against women. And number four, the amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. What do you think happened in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, except desperate people willing to cross a desert with children in their arms, on foot? That's called desperate people, not invading hordes of invaders. And so we have to see that wherever there are desperate people, anything we do to make people less desperate actually creates more peace, creates more harmony, and creates more prosperity. If you really want a prosperous economy in 10 years from now, I'll tell you what you do. You take better care of your 10-year-olds today. You want a prosperous economy 10 years from now? Think of all the millions and billions and trillions of unrealized economic potential we will have if we do not do everything possible to develop the brain of every American child. And look at how immoral it is, really immoral, that in the richest country in the world, we base our educational funding primarily on property taxes, so that if a child is in a financially advantaged neighborhood, then they have a very good chance of a high quality public school education. But if they're not, well, just too bad. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't going to change unless we change it. And many people say that the president's agenda is immoral, and I agree with that. But it's not enough to just say it's immoral. We have to posit what would be moral. What would be moral policy? What would be moral policy is to put our children first. That's why I want to have a United States Department of Children and Youth. What would be a moral policy is to show up as a world leader in reversing climate change with a World War II mass mobilization that is going to be necessary. What would be moral is to have a U.S. Department of Peace and a peace academy as well as a military academy and peace games as well as war games. And what would be moral is for us to know that just like the Catholics go to confession and the Jews go to the holiest day of the year is Yom Kippur, and in AA meetings they have to admit the exact nature of their character defects and take a fearless moral inventory. Just as every country, just like every individual, can't have the future we want unless and until we're willing to clean up the past, it's time. Let's pay reparations for slavery and take reparative measures for Native Americans. You do those things and you start releasing such energy. You're talking there about a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the sinews of the American civilization. Every bit of public policy in the United States, both domestic and international, should be built around one core principle, and it's not profitability for huge multinational corporations. It should be built around one core principle, and that is what would help people thrive. That's what it should be built around. What would help people thrive? Because when people thrive, you release the creativity and the productivity of the American people. You release the creativity and the productivity, uncap people's dreams, unleash people's spirits. That's why people should have universal health care, so you don't even have to think about it. That's why we should have free college tuition at colleges, state colleges and universities, so you don't even have to think about it. That's why we should remove those college loan debts. Not a little bit and this percentage and this particular thing. Let me tell you something. We had a $2 trillion tax cut, and then we have a $1.5 trillion college loan debt. Trade ya. That was easy. So this is the deal, ladies and gentlemen. You do all those things I'm just mentioning, and guess what you have? You have people who have time to talk to their spouses and have time to read to their little kids the books that they want mommy or daddy to read them before they go to bed at night. You have people who have the time and the energy to talk to their children. You have people who are happier, who aren't living in chronic anxiety and stress, and so they're happy and productive at work as employers and employees. You have people who aren't as desperate, and so you have a lot of social pathology that doesn't arise because you don't have these huge masses of anxious, tense people who are hardly making it day to day. All of that seems like common sense to me. Is there anybody here for whom what I have just said is not common sense? The fact that what I just said tonight, which to us is common sense, is deemed too radical or out there, should tell you what trouble we're in. So, it's up to us. The founders gave the power to the people. But particularly the people in New Hampshire, particularly the people in Iowa, particularly the people in South Carolina, particularly the people in Nevada, particularly now the people in California, and so forth. We want to shore up what remains. And it's the 11th hour, but it's not midnight yet. You know, Winston Churchill is famous for having said that you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they have exhausted every other option. There are people all over the world who are rolling their eyes about us now. There are people all over the world who are rolling their eyes, just can't believe what we're thinking. And the truth of the matter is that if you look at it historically, it is true that sometimes Americans are kind of slow to get there because we have other things to do first. Sometimes we're slow to get there. But even those who are the most critical of us, if they know anything about history, they have to admit, sometimes we're slow to wake up. But when we do wake up, we slam it like nobody's business. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to slam it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.